Good morning, friends. It's good to be together again today. Um, I am just so happy to be here this morning with my friends uh, Jen and Gail from Promise Place. And we have started a series on managing mental health through a pandemic. And we're going to continue that conversation today. But allow me to have my guests introduce themselves real quick, remind folks who they are, what they do, where they do it, and then we'll jump in and get started.
Gail, would you like to go first?
You. My name is Gail Westberg, and I am the clinical supervisor and a trauma therapist here at Promise Place.
And I am Jen Gonzalez. I'm the executive director at Promise Place. What should we talk about today, y'all?
Well, in October, I experienced the death of a family member from COVID, and it started me thinking about during this pandemic, we're all vulnerable in some way, either having the virus ourselves, knowing someone who has the virus, a dear loved one may have the virus, there may involve hospitalization and sometimes death. And also, as we're considering COVID, we think we may be getting to the end of all this, and then what happens, but a variant pops up. So when I began to think about these things, I decided I'd look and see what Merriam-Webster said about vulnerable. And that meaning is capable of being physically or emotionally wounded in some way. And I think we are open to either of those or both of those.
Gail, I think a lot of people have experienced both the physical and emotional wounds of this pandemic, either from having a loved one that has been ill or passed away, that person having that physical, but also being the supportive family member and having that emotional impact. I mean, it's been very draining.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What do you think has been the hardest part for you, having lost a loved one?
I think even though I do the work I do, even though I'm trained and educated to respond to trauma, um, I I don't think that made it any easier. Um, I think we all maybe live in some kind of bubble in order to protect ourselves and think this won't happen to me. So then when it does, it's very painful.
Mm-hmm. For sure. I know there's been a lot of emotional turmoil around the pandemic. And you mentioned something a second ago about just as we think we're turning a corner, just as we think things are improving, and as would be human nature, we sort of start letting go of a couple of things and feeling a little more free. And then a new variant pops up, and it kind of startles us into realizing we're vulnerable. We're still
Yes.
vulnerable.
Mhm.
I know for myself, when I heard about the most recent variant, I thought it kind of hit me a little bit differently than I had anticipated, because I had truly been like mentally preparing myself that we're really turning a corner, things are improving. And then I realized, by allowing myself to be that emotionally vulnerable, when this new um, variant came up, it was kind of painful.
Hmm.
It was kind of painful. Not only because it's a little bit scary to think about another variant, but also because I realized I had emotionally put myself out there, and it is what it is.
Yeah. And, being in the midst of a pandemic and being vulnerable just in terms of what that pandemic means for all of us and how it shapes our future, really.
Hmm.
Um, you know, there may be other issues going on with us that compound how we respond and react to what's going on with this pandemic.
I think you're right about that. I think you're right about that. What are you seeing at the college, Bill?
Well, I had somebody the other day tell me that, they would love to learn the Greek alphabet, but doing it by, association to variants of, of COVID is not the best way to try to learn the
Mhm.
Greek alphabet. So Omicron or whatever this new variant is, coming at us, it's certainly talk of the campus, as to far as what it means. And we're all waiting to probably see what it means, the current vaccinations, what kind of protections that going to provide, and so forth and so on. But as we were talking about, what it reminds us of, the vulnerability. We talk about triggers, right? And
Mm.
whether we're cruising along in our semester and we have our adversities, what we talked about last time, and we feel like we've developed some pretty good resources and coping mechanisms, and we feel a little more control of our life, and then all of a sudden something happens and kind of triggers us back to the reality that, oh, I may be a little vulnerable, susceptible to things like anxiety or avoidance, the very things that I was working hard to overcome.
Mhm.
And here I am kind of back in it again, in the trenches, dealing with some of those anxieties and fears and overwhelmed sense of here we go again. And, we get right back into, okay, well, all right, strap up the boots and let's get at it again.
Do you get a sense that, I mean, from what you're just saying, I get a sense that vulnerability is connected to a couple of other like strong emotions too: fear, anxiety, and also that when we experience that vulnerability and the fear and anxiety, that our kind of like instinct is to just like retreat back. And then we have a new issue with then isolation or withdrawal, kind of complicates it even further.
Yeah, absolutely. That old fight or flight, and we all have our go-tos. Some folks go to the flight, just get away from it, just avoid it, tuck yourself, and try to hide from it, escape from it. And then others are, okay, well, now I got to go into hypervigilance and try to get back control and try to figure it all out and put out the fires and all that kind of stuff. And either way that you go, extreme wise, can create complications.
Hmm. And another response might be to just freeze and feel like kind of paralyzed by the experience. Mm.
So how we see that manifest at the college is in when folks, we get the emails and the phone calls or the visits, and it's just that sense of being overwhelmed. Like I have to withdraw from a class or all my classes because I've just had too much go on. Somebody in the family got sick, or we our jobs have been disrupted, and so it's just a lot that can spin that really delicate balance of wholeness and health, and I can manage and we can do the things that we've set out to do. But you know, when another variant hits or another national or international tragedy hits, it just kind of puts us back into that sense of vulnerability and reminding us that you know, we don't have a lot of control over certain things in our lives.
Mhm. What are some of the ways that people respond to vulnerability? You mentioned like some college students, and I would venture to say folks that are outside of the college system might want to shed some excess weight when, you know, there's too much on the plate and start feeling overwhelmed. There may come a time when you just have to start letting go of some stuff. Um, but what are some other ways to respond to that sort of situation?
So also when I began contemplating vulnerability during the pandemic, I looked at um, Brene Brown, who is a fairly well-known social work professor, and she's done some work on vulnerability. And her definition of vulnerability is uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. But vulnerability is not weakness. It's our most accurate measure of courage. So there are some things that we can do in response. And so some of those things might be staying connected with family and friends, you know, kind of bringing your support system in close to you. Um, and generally being good to yourself. You know, sometimes we can be our own worst enemy, um, but we need to be intentional about being good to ourselves. And, you know, there's any number of things that can go along with that. You know, let's eat well, you know, exercise if that only means taking a walk. Because if you're taking a walk outside, there's fresh air, there's scenery. It can be both physically and emotionally beneficial.
And I'm almost hearing that sometimes we have to challenge ourselves when our initial response is to withdraw, that we should check with ourselves and maybe actually do the opposite and seek out those connections. Or when
Absolutely.
our instinct
Mhm.
is to isolate, that we check with that and maybe push ourselves a bit to go outside for that walk.
Yes,
It's hard to do that though.
it is. It is very, very hard, and and that's one of the reasons it's important um, to have a support system. There's cheerleaders for you that will encourage you to do what's good for you.
What is a natural support system? What does that mean?
Oh, that's a good question. Um, you know, I think for different folks, it can look different. Um, so would be those people in your life that um, are close to you, family, people that you trust, and for some folks that's not family.
Hmm.
For some folks, they're friends who really fulfill roles of family members. Um,
Hmm.
you know, there used to be a kind of joke in our family. Um, you know, you can't pick your family, but you get to pick your friends.
Yeah. And maybe natural support can include like people in different environments. So at school, natural supports might be the folks that are in the class with you that know the struggles that you're dealing with, whether it's like that online test that is frustrating or the work you're learning is frustrating. Um, just the struggle of like going to school. But then it might also be a colleague where, you know, you can share the struggles of work life with your colleague
Mhm.
and they understand because they work with you or in a similar work environment. And then, like you mentioned, friends and family as well. So maybe natural support is in a lot of different places.
Absolutely.
And I would say inclusive of the fur babies and fur friends that people have. I think taking the walks is great. And when you have a favorite pet that you can take a walk with or snuggle
Mm-hmm.
up on the couch with,
Mm-hmm.
that's always good. And I'm a very nature oriented person. So taking that walk, being outside, just sitting, listening to the wind, watching the clouds, watching the stars at night, very therapeutic, very grounding for me to be able to
Yeah.
use those natural support systems that are literally all around me at all times, and just being cognizant and aware of that. The other thing I was thinking, about what our responses are is I think, when we get our first reaction to something, is when you get that email that kind of curdles your skin or your blood a little bit, and you're like, I can't respond to that email right now. I need to let my emotions kind of
Mm-hmm.
settle a little bit before I, respond and hit send, and then I can do some self-talk and reassessment of the situation. So when we talk about kind of the new variant, Omicron, and we can say, all right, so what's really changed? I mean, yes, it sounds horrible, but what's really changed? Well, okay, I've got options here. I can continue to wear my mask. Yes, I've been vaccinated, but I can still
Mm-hmm.
continue to wear my mask as safety precaution for me and for others around me. I can choose where I go. I can still avoid the large crowds if I want to avoid the large crowds. There's still a sense of control that I have in managing the news that there's a new variant out there. If I haven't been vaccinated, I always have the choice to get vaccinated. So there are things, when we feel that vulnerability, weakness, being fragile, it's like, okay, well, wait a minute. There are things I can do about this, continue to do about this, and put that back into perspective, and say, well, right now, I feel like I might want to drop some things, but let me just continue to do what I know I can do and move forward and see where it takes me. I think we have to do some of that reevaluation, self-talk, and as you said, um, bending the ears of the others around us and having those sounding boards give us some feedback as well, and not just give in to our first impulses to run, hide, fight, or whatever. So.
And I think you make a very good point, is that it really is important for us to understand we are not powerless. We have choices, just like you have discussed.
And something about what you said, Bill, also reminded me like having choices and having some self-talk, like drawing on your past experiences to recognize like, why am I feeling this way? And it actually reminded me of my own experience being in college. And after I had a few semesters under my belt, I realized that I go through kind of an emotional roller coaster during a semester where I start off all gung ho, and then about midway through the semester, I have these thoughts of what was I thinking? Why am I doing this? This is too much. And then knowing that feeling of kind of feeling overwhelmed and like nervous and scared and wanting to like pull out, um, and then pushing through and realizing there is like a light at the end of the tunnel. um, when I've realized that, I thought, that's weird. But then when the next semester I started having these feelings of anxiety and, my stomach kind of clenching up and worrying about stuff, and then I realized, wait a minute, this feels familiar. Why does this feel familiar? And fortunately, I had some natural supports that were able to talk with me. And it turns out not only that, yeah, that makes sense, we felt that too, but we were able to support each other. And it kind of reminded me, helped me recognize that past experience to draw on.
And while I have the experts with us today,
Oh boy.
I know we're taping this at the front end of December. We know that the holiday season is ramping up quickly and will quickly take us before we blink. It'll be, Christmas Eve and all that fun stuff.
Yeah.
And we're talking about vulnerability. We're talking about triggers. And while I have both of you, could you kind of talk a little bit about the triggers of the holidays that can bring up a lot of what we're talking about as far as the feeling vulnerable, feeling, kind of loneliness, some of the anxiety and the depression that can kind of come along with what the holiday season can bring. Would that be all right to tap into your clinical experience on that topic?
I
Sure.
think that's a
Why
great
not?
idea. Go ahead, Gail.
So I'm thinking about, all the pressures that are associated with the holidays, you know, gift giving. Some families decide they're going to do an exchange and draw names so that the expense can be minimized. But then there's, you know, gosh, am I going to have to travel? And I've recently heard on the news about airline troubles and gas prices, and people are really being stressed about that because they want to spend holidays with loved ones. Then they're faced with, I'm going to have to travel. What am I going to do with my dog? Does my dog come or not come? Well, maybe I'll invite everybody to my house. So you invite everybody to your house, and then your uncle shows up with his dog that's not house trained. And how do you handle that situation? Or, your aunt wants to do cooking and you hate her cooking. And, how do I handle that? Because I want to make any bad feelings at the holidays. So how am I going to navigate this situation? Um, so there's a lot of stressors that can be associated with the holiday season. And and again, we're not just dealing with the holiday season. We still have our regular life to manage that has a whole nother set of stressors all its own. Um, so, um, there are some things that we can do, and again, some of the same things that we've talked about before. Remember, we're not powerless. We have choices. Um, Also, let's be good to ourselves. And um, there's one tip and trick I learned in some training that is really wonderful for anxiety and don't know if I can get to a position where I can show you, but it's called the butterfly, and you just do this and just so soothing and calming and really let me put a plug in for Promise Place. We are here to help so that you don't have to do it alone. You know, we are here to serve victims of sexual assault and victims of other crimes, and nobody has to get through that by themselves.
The holidays really can be stressful. For some folks, it may be kind of the opposite end of the spectrum for socializing, in that they may not have family around here. We have a lot of individuals in our community that have moved here from somewhere else, and they may not have access to their family or friends that they would normally spend time with. Or their family situation may not be one that would be supportive in helping them manage stress through the holidays. So, as you both pointed out, having those choices to make about caring for yourself and being good to yourself, making those very basic decisions. I'm going to drink some water today. I'm going to go to bed at a reasonable time that allows me to get enough sleep. If I am going to spend time with my family, I'm going to choose the amount of time that is good for me. And when I've reached that limit, I'm going to say, I've got to go. And that it's okay to do that. It's okay to do that, to take care of yourself. That way you can get the most out of the holidays, but not sacrifice yourself. Not sacrifice yourself. This vulnerability thing it's a lot.
And
Indeed.
taking care of oneself is not being selfish.
Mm-mm.
I have heard that from clients. It is not being selfish. Anybody who has ever traveled by plane knows the flight attendant says, when the oxygen masks come down, put your own on before trying to assist someone else. So caring for yourself is not selfish. You can't help someone else until you've helped yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I like that example. Definitely put yours on so then you can help other people. So
Mhm.
it's a very good reminder. It along with, the holiday season is that that internalized pressure, if you will. It's like, oh, well, this is the most wonderful time of the year, right? This is the time of the year, no matter what's going on, I'm supposed to be happy and joyful, and my spirits are supposed to be high. And so we see all the commercials on TV, and they're all happy, and it's like, there's sometimes that cognitive dissonance of, I'm supposed to be this, but actually I'm feeling like Ebenezer Scrooge and the Grinch, and it's just hard for me to pull this off. And so again, I think it comes down to the self-talk and saying, hey, I don't have to be a commercial, and I don't have to be, the Hallmark movie that everything just falls into place nicely and all the problems are resolved and everybody gets along. And that's just not the reality of, like we've talked about, families don't always just get along, and families do have its complications. And so we do have to take those, we put ourselves in time out sometimes, right? That's why it's good to be, if it's, if you're on the same house, at least be able to walk outside, go to the garage, take a dog for a walk or whatever. And then, but if you can go home and say, I've spent good time here, but now it's time to take a time out and go decompress a little bit and get in my nice comfy pajamas and some hot chocolate at home by myself and just kind of let it all absorb away. So, but that sense of knowing kind of your own limits and putting those boundaries out there is part of that self-care, and it's okay, and you need to do that, so that tomorrow you can get back up and go about the things you need to do.
For sure. Knowing your limits. Knowing your limits. You don't have to eat the whole pie, right?
I
Pace
might
yourself.
want to.
But pace yourself.
Right, absolutely. So what kind of, as we've talked about, the pandemic and now a new variant out there, and how that kind of triggers some things that we need to revisit, and deal with. The holidays are upon us, and the type of stressors that brings. If we kind of summarize what we've talked about, it's to not panic over the fact that, we may be a little bit vulnerable here. We were having that urge, a little bit of flight, maybe not want to deal with it, but to come back around and say, hey, what are my resources? What are my options? I have choices. I'm not powerless. That was one of the takeaways. What were a couple of the other takeaways that from what we've discussed?
One of the
Good to
takeaways for me was self-talk. Being able to recognize how you're feeling and to like acknowledge that to yourself. Because first you have to acknowledge it to yourself before you can be vulnerable to someone else, right?
Yes. Be good to yourself and use your support system.
I like your butterfly effect there too, Gail. A nice little
Thank you.
self-comforting way to bring some peace and security and comfort to ourselves. And as you said, reach out to others again, whether it's a friend that you can confide in, whether it's a therapist at Promise Place or somewhere else, local church support, wherever that we have positive support systems that we talked about, those natural support systems, to make sure we identify them and make sure that we're utilizing them as we go through a very stressful month of December.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Maybe just take a few minutes to think about like who are the people in your life that are supportive and encouraging and fill your cup. And also think about who are the people or places that you might want to avoid this time of year in order to keep your cup from draining.
Absolutely. Well, as always, my friends, this is a wonderful time to just get together and share thoughts based on what we see in our practices and our places of work and the people that we're around. But how important it is to have these conversations and spread the good news that there are things that we can do, and that we're all in this together, no matter what, and no matter what the crisis is, no matter what time of year it is. We are a species who are in relationships to each other, and so we can be great resources to each other. At the same time, we have to understand that sometimes there are people we need to have a little distance from, and that's okay too. So,
For sure, for sure. I really appreciate getting to talk with you guys and have this moment of vulnerability to even just have this conversation. It's a good way to practice.
absolutely. I wish a very happy holiday season, and whatever that looks like for you, whether that's under a blanket with hot chocolate or out kind of going through the neighborhood, looking at all the different lights that are displayed right now. There's just so many fun ways to celebrate this time of year, but also as you take care of yourself, that you'll find those ways as well.
Thanks for inviting us, and for whoever might be viewing this, whether it's before the holidays or afterwards. I hope that you'll take time to recognize your choices and hang in there through whatever you might be managing right now.
Mhm. And
Thanks.
we'll do this again. We'll do this again next year, which is not far away.
Not far away at all. So happy holidays, everyone, and take good care of you.
Thank you. All right. Goodbye, everyone.
Till next time.
Bye.